the city council representative to the committee.
I'm Nancy Goodlow, appointed to this committee just last couple of weeks, and I'm a member of the city council.
Janine Brodeen from the Roslyn City Council. I'm the outlier.
I'm Dave Sturgill from the County Homelessness and Affordable Housing Committee.
John Raymond, I'm with Hope Source.
Susan Grindle, Hope Source.
Don Green with the Kittitas Valley Ministerial Association.
Liberty Bourne, Comprehensive Healthcare.
Kansas Place with Albert PD.
Sasha Burkhart, Kittitas County Health Network, representing the Care Coordination Program.
And Doug Folk, Kittitas County Health Network.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Delano Palmer. I'm on the city council. Councilman Josh Thompson couldn't be here, so I'm sitting in his stead. I have not been on this committee, so this is my first time.
Yeah. Do you want the staff to introduce?
Absolutely. So Heidi Barron-Cernaway, city manager, and our Ellensburg city staff have been helping staff this committee for over 2 years now.
Dan Carlson, Community Development Director.
Lily Fry, Housing and Grants Coordinator for the City of Ellensburg.
Teo Vichieri, GIS Supervisor, City of Ellensburg.
Folks online.
Taylor's the one who made the nifty interactive maps that, yes. So Commissioner Walksmith, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, you just did. Commissioner Waxsmith, I took over.
We've lost your audio.
No.
You look frozen, Brett. There we go. Okay.
He's muted, muted.
So, yeah, so he's been introduced, so we'll move on. And I can't read it. So who else is online?
I'm Brittany Bushwari. I'm Director of Operations for Hope Source.
Okay. Is there any other committee members online? Okay.
So I believe we have Andy Pollock, who is our business representative.
Okay.
And I believe.
And I'm sorry for my tardiness. I should be there in 10 minutes or less.
Oh, you're on your way. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So the agenda is we're going to have a presentation and an overview of the proposed sites. Then we will have some time for public comment. I'm going to limit that to a half hour and limit the comments to comments on the site, comments on the sites. And then if we need to, we'll take a 5-minute break while people change their scores or score their sheets as needed. And we'll have staff tally those up, and then we'll reconvene for a committee discussion and recommendation. So that's the plan. Let's dive into the presentation, please.
That's great. Thank you, Councilmember Goodlow and members of the ad hoc committee and the community. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. What you see before you is kind of a comprehensive overview of the sleep center and why we're actually talking about this today. Before we get to the sites themselves, this committee had a discussion about making sure people understand how we got to the place that we are today, and to better lay the groundwork for how to move forward together. So I have a number of folks that will be helping me with the presentation today, and then the analysis of sites. And so, as I mentioned, Heidi Barron-Cernaway, the city manager, and we're happy to take questions as we go. It might be easier as just to finish the presentation, and then we can stop and take a look back. But if you have some burning questions as we move forward, please raise your hand. And I would also encourage you. We're using microphones today because the folks online can't hear us unless we can get, unless you're speaking in the microphone. So just a reminder. And I don't know if Mr. Lael would like to introduce himself before I get going. Thank you, Jerry. Great. Okay, so we're going to start out and Lily's going to move us forward here and we're going to take a couple breaks and we'll have a couple of our service providers talk a little bit about their programs. So just a little bit about the ad hoc committee. This committee was actually formed. Our first meeting was in January of 2022. Our discussion started in December of 2021 with a meeting between the Ellensburg City Council and the county commissioners talking about the regulatory framework and the need for services and some of the gaps in the community. We're noticing an elevated number of people experiencing homelessness in our community and some challenges around that. And I had identified some gaps around that. And so this committee came together to look at a very complex problem and challenge that a lot of communities face. I call these sticky problems. These are the challenges of our communities that aren't easy to fix. There's no one thing to do that can solve the issue. And they also take long-term, systemic and collaborative work together to address effectively in communities and helping support people experiencing homelessness in our communities to address, behavioral health issues, health and safety issues, public health and safety issues, housing issues, et cetera, is important to work together. So the committee was made up of a city council member and also a county commissioner and a number of, and all of the agencies you see before you and a number of staff to help with the analysis and discussions. And we've had some wonderful discussions, and there's been some actions that have come out of this group. So for the purpose of the site evaluation, we actually added a couple members. And so we've added a member from the Housing and Homelessness Committee from the county. We've had 2 business members that are joining you today, and we've added 2 additional council members with us. And so this is sort of an enhanced version of our original ad hoc committee. Next slide. All right. So to start with, our conversation started with what most people have heard in this community and a lot of communities, the Boise v. Martin. And again, this was a 9th Circuit Court of Appeals decision a number of years ago that basically said you can't effectively enforce your camping ordinances unless you have a place for people to be. And so it was a regulatory framework that was put in place and to make sure communities had places for people to be. So homelessness was not a crime, essentially. And so that part of what's considered in this is that we need low barrier options in communities that have access. So people have access for a safe place to sleep overnight in order to enforce camping ordinances in, for instance, public parks or in public right of ways. So we have to provide safe places for people to be. We have in our community a cold weather shelter. It's been a seasonal shelter, and Pastor Don will talk a little bit about that in a slide or 2 here, that operates generally mid-November through mid-March. It's not sufficient to meet the terms of Boise v. Martin. And also it's been operated by volunteers in our community for about a decade. And we're having a fair amount of volunteer fatigue. And so the group has said they're tired and they need support from the city and county to continue, as well as our need for a year-round shelter. So there is the grants pass was another decision that that affects how homelessness and enforcement of regulations, camping regulations, can be affected in communities. That actually is being seen was seen by the Supreme Court. We do expect a decision, and that could go a number of different ways and could impact the outcome or the implications of the Boise v. Martin decision. This group started out talking about the regulatory framework, and along the way, I know we, like many other communities, discovered that when you deal effectively with the service needs and gaps in services of people experiencing homelessness, you actually it's not just about the regulatory framework. You actually make a difference in people's ability to be more effective community members and part of our community. And so regardless of that decision, some of the questions arising around that, we know that we need to support and probably do something different in our community and add to the service network that we have at this point. So, or service provisions. And a couple things that came out of this work for both at the city and county level is we both revised our camping ordinances to prepare for the ability to clarify where and when camping is allowed. And then with the city actually just this last year finished the compliance with the House bill. It was a 2022 bill, House Bill 1220 that passed that actually said the communities had to allow emergency shelters and transitional housings. And so the ordinance was a part of your packet. It's online and we have some additional copies, I believe, and we can refer to that at some point here. Essentially, the legal that law said that you have to allow emergency shelters, and I'm going to focus on emergency shelters because that's the focus today. But you had to allow those in places where in zones that you allow hotels, and then generally in most other residential zones as well. And so the staff, our community development staff, planning commission, and council went through almost a year-long process of shaping that zoning, and that was adopted in February of this year. And back to the importance of when you have really difficult challenges and you actually need to address those with a systems approach. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. So one of the questions a lot of communities face are, why are we experiencing so many people in our communities? The numbers are going up. If you're watching them over time, they're not going down. A lot of communities are enacting programs similar to sleep centers, but not just sleep centers, just a continuum of services to meet people where the needs are. The first group is actually a list that was provided by Hope Source, looking at the numbers as we were looking at this last year's point in time census, and looking at there are a number of contributing factors to homelessness, and that continue to shift how people their ability to pay for and stay in housing. And so I won't go through those in detail. You can read those. There's also an associated cost of homelessness. What happens is when folks don't have a place to stay, the rest of our emergency response costs go up, hospitalization. We use the systems, the public systems in our community. And there was a 2018 study done, and I'm sure there's something more current, but there's a cost savings. When people had basic access to shelter, the savings to the community in other areas, there's a market savings for communities. And so very important to remember that's what we're talking about today. So again, any community, and the state actually just came out, the Ruckle House, I want to say museum, but it's not the museum, the Ruckle House Center. It came out with a study that was initiated by the state looking at how do we affect this the challenge of people experiencing homelessness or unhoused. And really, the issue was we have to approach it in a systematic and systemic approach. We have to look at where people's needs are and make sure we're meeting people's needs. We have to look at it long term, and we have to look at different types of housing interventions. And so in addition to medical, behavioral health treatment, substance use disorder treatment, things like that, and making sure that we're looking at the spectrum of services for housing that we have to move people from the streets and off into housing and more stable lives. All right. And this was just an image that I really liked when I think about sort of the spectrum of services and needs for people in our community and in other communities. There are, again, meeting people where they're at to help move them. And, oftentimes people say it starts with having a safe place to sleep. All right. So I would like to welcome Don Green to talk a little bit about the cold weather shelter and what our experience has been the last few years.
Green means on? Okay, thank you. We've been running a cold weather shelter in Ellensburg for 9 years. And I guess the bottom line purpose for an overnight shelter or even a sleep center like we're talking about is just to give an answer to that fundamental question that every person experiencing homelessness asks themselves, where am I going to sleep tonight? That's why we started the cold weather shelter during the cold weather months, because that's a life-threatening thing if they're just going to sleep outside. And just knowing the answer to that question, where they're going to sleep, allows a person then, if they have a place to sleep, to begin addressing the other pressing needs that they have. They can begin giving attention to things that have led to their homelessness. That's what the committee has been focusing on. You may not know this, but nearly 60% of those that were using the cold weather shelter just this year had some form of disabling condition. About 25% of them never finished high school. And some of them then are suffering too from substance abuse, either alcohol or drugs or both. And these kinds of conditions make it difficult for a person to find and to keep a job that then pays enough for them to afford a place to live. And so they end up being homeless and on the streets. But with the right assistance and along with consistent support and encouragement, mental, physical, spiritual support, these conditions can be overcome, and that allows then people to become productive members of society. And so what the cold weather shelter has experienced over the last few years, we have tried very hard not to make the cold weather shelter a place where people feel like they're living there. And we don't want the sleep center to do that either. It's just a place for them to sleep for the night and then prepare them to meet the challenges for the next day. Those wanting to use the service will need to go there every evening, and they need to check in. It's not a 24-hour shelter that we're talking about. We haven't run a 24-hour shelter as a cold weather shelter. We don't want to do that with the sleep center. There's no reason for people to linger. They come, they sleep, they leave, and they go about their business as they disperse back into the community the next day. And there are things that we did at the cold weather shelter to mitigate difficulties. For example, we want the place to be safe. And so everybody that came checked in and they were screened. And then they were allowed to take some of their personal property with them to their place where they were actually going to lie down and sleep. Things like cell phones or their toothbrush, toothpaste, and a book or something like that. The rest of their belongings were securely locked up and stored so that they didn't have access to them while they were in the shelter, because we have no idea what they take with them or what they bring with them when they would come into the shelter. So they would come into the shelter and be screened. And then once they're screened, they don't have the right to come in and out of the shelter after that, because if they left the shelter, you don't know what they would bring back in with them again. So once they were screened, they were in the shelter for the night. If they did leave, they weren't allowed to come back in again until the next night, where they could be screened again. So all that is just in an effort to make sure that everybody that is staying there, plus all of the people who are staffing the shelter, remain safe. So and I'm sure during the center hours that the center will be open, as well as with the cold weather shelter, there will be the opportunity for some of the service communities or the social services agencies in town to have contact with the folks so that they can set up appointments to meet them later during the day at their respective businesses to provide the services that the people need, the people who have the disabling conditions or the alcohol and abuse problems. They can be meeting with Merit and Community Health and those kinds of places during the day. But when they are located in one place in the evening, it makes it very convenient for those agencies to come by and meet them, find out their information, interview them, find out what kinds of things will then help them out. And in this past cold weather shelter season, you may not know this either, 89% of those who we served were residents of Kittitas County, which really means that we're primarily trying to help our own folks become productive members of society and help them put their lives back together again. That's really what we're trying to do. So the thing that's made it difficult for this past year, or not even just past year, the last couple or 3 years, has just been the number of volunteers it takes to run the shelter. If you think about it, we have usually about 3 or 4 in the evenings that are there. And then if there's food being provided, there are a couple of people associated with that. So that could take 4 people up to 6. And then there's a couple of people that come in the morning. That makes 8. 8 people times 7 nights a week is 57. Is that right? 56. Got to get my math right here. 56 volunteers volunteer, every week. And if you had just 100 people, you're talking about those people doing it a couple times a month at least, if not more. And that just gets tiring after a while. So you got that problem. Then you have the issue of churches running their programs and things that they want to do. This year in particular, we had a little bit more difficulty coordinating which church would host on which night, just because they had other programs and stuff that had been going on for months before they were going to host the cold weather shelter. Oh, and to clarify that, the cold weather shelter was rotating amongst 6 different churches to cover the 7 nights that the shelter was running from the middle of November to the middle of March. So that becomes, and this during COVID, that was particularly tough because then you had to provide the right kinds of space and safety and distance from people. So for those, for 2 years, we had it in a single location rather than 7 locations, but we've gone back to the 7 location way of doing it. It's getting very difficult to do that. So we can't continue very much longer. I'm not sure what else I want to add to what I've said. It's just that it's time to take care of these folks in a different manner than what we have been doing to make it easier for them. It hasn't been easy for them to remember which night is where the shelter is located each night. I remember where I live because I go there every night to sleep, but they have a different place every night where they have to go and they have to remember where that is. So there's a lot of things that we've experienced that we will take into the sleep center as we get it up and going, just to make sure that it's safe for people, safe for the area around, so that people so they don't have a reason to loiter around. They just go about their business during the day. So I guess unless there's other questions anybody would like to know about, that's all I'll do.
I think, Chris, do you want to take a place at the table or up here? And if we're short on chairs, we can borrow some from this table here. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Don. So we'll move on with the slides. And we wanted to talk a little bit about sort of trends. And the state actually has different terminology for different experiences and types of homelessness, state and federal. And what we've seen, and these were the preliminary numbers provided by Hope Source for the point in time census. And what we've seen is an increase in the number of unsheltered and sheltered folks in our communities. All right. So one of the benefits, we've called it the housing first model, is that if you look at what is it, Maslow's needs, essentially, that, having a safe place to sleep at night is one of the basic requirements for human beings. And then you can only build from there. And so oftentimes people who are experiencing homelessness have a number of challenges, as was mentioned previously. And in order to actually get help and work on those challenges, the stability of having a safe place to sleep at night is one of the basic needs. And so I think Hope Source is going to to talk a little bit to us about the success rate. And there have been outcomes-based studies that show that when people have a safe place to sleep, the pathway out of homelessness is much more successful. And so the success rates are higher and the stay rates are much higher as well. All right. So when we are talking about shelters, we're going to talk about a very specific model. We call this a sleep center. And again, we're looking at something different than a congregate setting. When Pastor Green was talking about the churches, that's what we call a congregate setting model. We have a lot of people in our communities that have a difficulty, and there's a safety issue for people being in this under the same roof, essentially. And it's really difficult to have people set up or separated into rooms in order to monitor those. So what a lot of communities have done is looking at individual shelters. And so we actually we had a feasibility study done. The picture you see here, they're called pallet shelters. There are a couple other models out there of stand-up shelters. These are individual shelters, overnight shelters, essentially. They're not meant to for people to live in 24 hours. And they're set up again in individual spots. And they're separated, so you can actually have folks who may have behavioral health issues, that may be experiencing some crisis, but they could find that safety in that safe space by themselves. So they tend to be much safer for the people using them, and people tend to use them because they have a little bit of privacy, at least overnight. So safety is an ongoing thing for people that don't have the home to live in. Okay. All right. So as we looked at operating framework, when we're talking about sleep centers, we tried to look at other communities. And when we talk about operations, oftentimes operations can mitigate a lot of concerns about, what this is and how it happens. So when we looked at the shelter setting, essentially, we're looking at a managed site. And so something that would be available year round. Again, we're looking at overnight only. The hours are not set in stone. Approximately 6 p.m. to 8 a.m., or it could be an hour or two on either side of that, depending on what other conditions we would need to work around. The idea of working with, beginning with 25 shelters, that number we came up with based on other communities, based on our point in time numbers, and based on just generally our general sense about the uptake, the general use based on our current numbers and the use of the cold weather shelter. We believe there are a number of folks out there who will not use the cold weather shelter, but unless it's super cold out, but we know folks who would likely use this with the individual settings. It would have on-site staff, and along with that, we would need a staff office and a safe intake. Again, you need restroom facilities, a shower unit. Sometimes those are temporary, sometimes those are permanent units. The pallet company actually makes modular units that you can move on site as long as you have a utility access. And then some, small community area as well, usually for a little evening congregation. And then ideally, if there is opportunity to provide meals, overnight storage and safety of belongings is a big deal for people experiencing homelessness. And there can be a lot of crime and a lot of sometimes violence based on protecting one's things. And so one of the things we learned from the other communities is even a garbage can with a lock, clean garbage can with a lock on it, that as part of the intake, folks actually put their belongings in that safe spot, so they're safe overnight. And so that's something that a lot of the sleep centers are doing. And so the procedures too, generally it's a controlled entrance. There's fencing around, and so there's security. And again, and the only way to enter is through the time period by which the entry is open. So if it's an hour or two at the beginning of the opening, and then the only other access is by law enforcement at night. And similar to what was talked about with a cold weather shelter, if someone leaves, they can't get back in unless it's through law enforcement. So And then again, we talked about secure storage, and, free of litter and trash, fencing, lighting, cameras, things like that to help monitor and, maintain the security. And then again, overnight on-site security, for everyone's safety. So those are some pretty standard procedures, and operational procedures that other communities have in place that we're envisioning with this. All right. So here's an opportunity to talk a little bit about and have our providers. So Hope Source actually operates the Moses Lake model. There are a number of other models. I think this is very close to some of the rules and an opportunity to kind of learn from them. So I think we have Brittany online to share a little bit about their experience.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. So at the Moses Lake Sleep Center, we are dedicated to serving a really diverse community, and hopefully doing so with compassion and effectiveness. The demographics of our guests really paint the picture for kind of the way that we operate and what we hope to do with them. 68% of those we serve have disabilities, which speaks to the need to have accessible facilities and an easy exit and entry as well. Just highlighting that commitment to inclusivity and accessibility. 47% of our guests identify as having substance use disorder. So that's actually less than half of the guests that use the sleep center. What's really remarkable is the kind of the local demand for services. 94% of the guests that use the sleep center are from Grant County. And I think that's one of the concerns that Kittitas County has and Grant County had as well, is kind of, if you build it, they will come. We are nearly 4 years into the sleep center, and this is the enrollments from this year. So we haven't seen a huge uptick of people from outside of the community accessing the shelter. 31%, so about a third of the people that use the shelter are actually employed, and of those, 70% are employed on a full-time status. So I think that just kind of speaks to the economic situation that a lot of the people who are experiencing homelessness are facing. Federal minimum wage is 2 hash browns per hour. With the rate of market rate of rentals right now, it's really difficult to maintain housing, even if you are fully employed. Over the last year, we supported 22 veterans at the sleep center. We really strive to make it an open and inclusive place. We extend across all different age groups, 18 and over. About a third of our guests are over the age of 55. Again, kind of demonstrating that financial hardship for individuals who have really limited financial resources. One thing that has been really outstanding with the sleep center that I've noticed is that beyond being a safe place to sleep, we have really been able to connect our guests to resources. And for a program that provides no case management and no financial assistance, we had 92% of our guests successfully exit. And 60% of them have secured individual permanent housing. So we really feel like this has been a significant step forward. I think a big piece of that is that our average length in program is nearly 1 year. So I think getting people together in one place and being able to build a rapport and build a relationship with guests and build that trust that's really needed for them to take steps forward. We've really had the opportunity to do that in the sleep center, where we've always done 3 times a week outreach in the community. We've felt like we've had really good relationships, but that sleep center and having the ability to make long-term relationships with clients has really, really been impactful on the success. Then kind of looking at operations, I think that Heidi touched on most of what we do. We do very similar operations as what Kittitas County is hoping to do with their sleep center. We operate from 6 p.m. until 8 a.m. Guests can line up outside starting at 5:30, and then we open the doors at 6. We move them through an initial screening. And then if it's a new guest, they will get an HMIS entry and a little bit more demographic information from them. Guests are assigned a new unit every day, and then they're assigned a tote with a lock. This gives them an opportunity to store their belongings and not have to kind of carry them around with them during the day when they're not utilizing the sleep center. It's also invaluable for those key documents such as an ID or social security card or birth certificate. Not having those and not having a safe place to keep them is a significant barrier to housing. We spend a lot of time in our rapid rehousing programs kind of getting those documents together. And when you don't have a mailing address and you don't have ID, it's really difficult. So having a safe place that they can securely store their critical documents is also really, really important impact of the sleep center. So then clients will move to what we call the back, which is where you see the sheds. They can mingle. We have games and tables and kind of smoking section and some heaters, so they can hang out outside or they can go to their units. Sometimes community members will donate food, or other organizations will donate food, and we'll have those available for guests. And then at 10 p.m., Hope Source staff exits and it's lights out. Everyone goes into their unit and then they stay there for the remainder of the evening, and we have overnight security. And then at 6:30 in the morning, the Hope Source staff comes back. We'll start doing initial wake-up calls, and usually people are exiting by 8 o'clock. We have great relationship with the Grant County Transit Authority, and so we have a bus that comes at 8 o'clock and another bus that comes at 8:05. So basically everyone can jump on the bus and head to where they're going. It's actually walkable distance from downtown and the library and parks, and some of the stores kind of on the other side of town. So those that choose not to use the bus, we usually walk to where they're heading to. It is not often that people will loiter. There's not much to do at the sleep center when we're closed, but we also have rules that we enforce for being on property. So you can be on property a half an hour before entry time, but anytime before that, that would be what we consider a minor violation. And same thing in the morning. If you're loitering more than a half an hour after, that's also a minor violation. If you rack up 4 minor violations, that will result in 24 hours out. It is very rare that people get to that point, and when they do get to that point, they spend one night outside or away from their belongings, and yet generally we never have a problem again. Kind of on that idea of shelter rules, we do have a safe on site that we allow people to relinquish their weapons. We don't allow to have guns on property, but a lot of times for safety, people who are unhoused feel the need to carry personal protection. And we just ask that they turn those over. We label it and we put it in a safe, and they can collect it on their way out in the morning. We also have, with the help of the Moses Lake Police Department, we have on-site drug disposal. So they have the opportunity, if they do bring something in that is not allowed in the property, that they can safely dispose of it on-site. And we're a low barrier shelter, so that means that there really are no barriers to entry. You need a place to sleep, you can come to the sleep center. We will ask the minimum amount of questions that we can to meet our programmatic requirements, but other than that, there's no income requirements, there's no housing status requirements. We really want to provide a safe place for people to sleep. Some challenges that we face. So the property that is behind the sleep center, immediately adjacent, it is a vacant field, and kind of up the hill a little bit from that, the property owner has allowed for people to camp on his property. Going back to, we have outreach records from 2018. So it's been there for a long time. And because it is private property, it is really difficult for local authorities to enforce the camping ordinance. And so that can be a challenge, just having that kind of right outside. I think some of the the trash or the belongings will get associated with the sleep center, which is unfortunate because we work really hard to keep our fence line clean. I mean, that kind of paired with the wind and being close to the freeway, we do always accumulate trash on the fence line, and the guests are really great. I mean, they treat it like their home, and we'll hand out garbage bags and we'll take a lap around, and on a weekly basis, we get it cleaned up on the outside. But yeah, because it is a private property behind, that definitely presents challenges as far as keeping it clean and that not being able to enforce the trespassing. And that's all I have to share. Does anyone have questions about how we operate the Moses Lake Sleep Center?
Thank you, Brittany. I think we're going to just hold on questions for now, and I'm trying to be really cognizant of time.
So we'll
Perfect.
keep
Thank you.
moving along here. Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Councilmember. When I just look forward, quick. There you go. All right. Excellent. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So it's important as a city, we always, and community, again, this is a partnership with the county. We always want to think about learning from others. And so when we talk about mitigating impacts, I know there's a strong interest from members in the community and also our elected leaders to make sure that we're learning from other communities and doing our best. And so Brittany mentioned, that we can't control what happens on private property. There are some rules that can be put in place to help mitigate some of those issues. For instance, the city of Vancouver actually has a no camping ordinance around their sleep sites. And so they have 4 sleep sites in their community. And so it actually regulates what happens on the private property around the areas too. So again, as we recognize the issues or challenges of a site and siting a site and maintaining that site, there are mitigating things that we can do to adjust operations or the regulations around that. And so I think there are ways to address a lot of the community concerns and challenges. All right. I know we've heard a lot, and we call it the magnet theory. If we build it, they will come. And so a lot of folks have concerns, a lot of communities, and so it's really important, as and that's why we asked Brittany to sort of share some of the demographics from other communities. This population tends to move around a fair amount, and so there is a portion of the population, we see that in the cold weather shelter, and that there are folks who come into the community and move through the community. But by and large, the core group of people who are here on a regular basis are people from this community. And so again, remembering that we live in a place, we have some wind and elements. It's not California. And also there's some challenges in our environment that help to manage and regulate that. And we talked a little bit about there are ways to mitigate and make sure we consistently enforce the regulations, that we have some standards around the operation of a shelter, and that low barrier does not mean without rules. And so it's very important to be very consistent on the framework that we provide around that. And the question is, for a lot of communities, is what we're doing good enough? And what we're hearing is our winter cold weather shelter is exhausted. And so we know something else needs to happen in our community. And a lot of communities are facing this very same challenge. Doing nothing generally is not an option. And because the challenges in our community are not getting better by themselves. And so go ahead, next slide. All right. So this group, the county commissioners and the city council made a decision in concept to move forward with it, exploring a sleep center in 2022, I believe it was. We did an extensive analysis at a staffing level about what are the sites, where will this be? We knew it would not be a popular place. We wouldn't have people standing up and saying, I want this right next to me. And so we went through all of the public owned property. We sat down with county staff, with city staff, with our fire marshal, and looked through all our properties and did some analysis, made some outreach, and we were not able to find a public site that was feasible according to our criteria. So we actually reached out to our Echo Northwest consultants to help us with this process, to do an analysis and also to do some costing to try to figure out what is the operational model, how much is this going to cost our community. This is a new service for our community, and so this is a big leap, and we want to go into this making solid decisions based on numbers. So they helped us out with the site analysis and worked through a number, helping us refine our site criteria, did some searches and evaluations. We looked at the operational models and cost analysis. And so I believe that report was actually shared in the packet. It's available online as well. So next slide. So in our analysis for site search, we looked through the zoning, we looked through all of the pieces, and where we ended was with a tentative agreement to work with Hope Source on the 1200 Ruby Street property. Hope Source purchased that property with city affordable housing sales tax dollars, with county recording fee dollars, in order to build affordable housing and on that site. And I believe at this point there are 64 units planned for that site, and they still had some available space in the rear essentially of the property, so farthest from the street, away from what we know are critical areas, and away from the street. So that agreement tentatively went to council at the beginning of March. The council wanted some public process because as generally when we're looking at land transactions, we don't do those out in public because oftentimes we have people looking for business opportunities and the price of a property goes up. And so when we brought this to council, again, we had done with a staff and consultant an analysis, and council wanted there to be a transparent process. And so that's what we're doing here today. We opened up a process for community members and city staff and county staff, anyone to submit ideas for a site analysis. We accepted those through the 15th through Monday. I think we got 13 on Sunday night or Monday morning. So we had a total of 43 parcels. Some were duplicate recommendations that came in, and we've done a deeper analysis. And so we have a sorting process for you. So. All right. So our site search criteria, I'm going to go through these one by one. I'll do these fairly quickly because I know we want to get into the sites themselves. Again, we'll go through these one by one. So if you want to just start with located in Ellensburg city limits. So when we talk about in the reason for our request and our preference for being in city limits is our zoning rules apply. We have shelter, we have zoning that actually allows for these at the county level. The county has not adopted our zoning. We have an interlocal agreement. So that would be a 3 to 6 month process at minimum for the county to actually adopt our zoning requirements. Our zoning requirements, I'll go through those in a couple of slides too. So property located in the urban growth area has to be permitted and developed under county standards. And so options for us would be to annex that property, again, another 3 to 6 month process, or again, to work with the county, and which we'll need to do anyway on adopting our zoning for those shelter standards. And again, permitting through an outside jurisdiction creates some challenges when you're working between two jurisdictions, and so oftentimes takes a little longer. Outside the urban growth area, we're not allowed to provide water and sewer services. This is a site that would be required to be served by a public utility system. And then remembering we do have central, we have central to services and transit. Central Transit is a city-owned transit authority essentially. And so we do have the ability to change routes. And so there is some flexibility to transit and transit operation. The next criteria was that it had to be available. We knew that we have a deadline with the Ministerial Association. Our goal was to try to stand up a site by the end of this year or by cold weather season. We are rapidly approaching that. And so we wanted to make sure property would be available. So either available for lease or available for purchase. And that we could accomplish the timeline to permit through, because again, if you have critical areas, if you have flood mitigation, there's a cost and a timeline, oftentimes that increases. And then access to utilities and the distance from those utilities. So zoning, again, we updated our ordinance, and this is just to generally, we included that in the packet. And let's see here. So emergency shelters, which is what this is included under, essentially are allowed by our zoning in any zone that allows hotels. And so you'll see the CH, so the P with the 9, that means it's permitted. And the 9 means it's subject to the permanent supportive transitional emergency houses. And I have a slide following this that goes over that. We actually require conditions that even when we're permitting our own or any outside entity to have an emergency shelter, they have to address a certain number of conditions. In other zones, again, not light industrial or heavier industrial, oftentimes under zoning rules, industrial and residential do not mesh. And this is ultimately a residential facility. And so oftentimes the activities happening on high and low light and heavy industrial properties, we don't put those next to housing developments generally. So, and so in other areas where you see the C, those zones actually allow, and those are all residential zones that allow this use by conditional use permit. And that means we have a hearing examiner that evaluates the criteria based on the information that we provide and based on our rules. Okay. All right. City standards for shelter facilities. And this is what's in our code under that. In order to permit these are the conditions that actually have to be met. So we have to go through the design, they have to meet all the codes. We have to have an operational plan to how are we going to do trash? What are the food rules? What are the rules for operating the site? And then it's a requirement to allow or to have behavioral health service access on site. So. All right, parcel size. I know there's been some discussions about, hey, these are little tiny units. Can't we just fit them in a parking stall? And no, we actually have fire code. There's some requirements for separation. And if we look at the site services and the fencing and the separation, the 1.25 acres allows us to actually expand over time if necessary. Citing one sleep center is going to be difficult. Citing more than one will be even more difficult likely. So we want to make sure that we can meet the needs over at least a 10-year period of time if the trends continue as they have in most communities. Our goal is always to have enough interventions and enough systemic that we're actually keeping people, helping move people out of the pathway of homelessness. And so again, and thinking about the other facilities, shower and a restroom and an intake office, that's a little bit more. It's not just the shelters themselves. So. Okay. And the other requirement, adjacent uses, we're looking at what are the potentially incompatible uses, what are the trade-offs? Are there ways to mitigate some of those? Things like, railroads and industrial activities. Again, these are residential units essentially. So want to make sure that we're looking at what issues to mitigate. And again, what other neighborhood impacts might these have? And again, there's likely no perfect spot in our community and there will be trade-offs. But so we need to talk about those and we need to figure out how we can address those. Okay. And is it accessible? So we talked about, making sure not everybody has a car. So by foot, by wheelchair, they also need to be ADA compliant. We have the ability to manage the bus routes and timing pickup, things like that. And making sure that people who use them can get to them and can get to the services that they need. Right. And then people have also asked, how are you going to afford this? And so we are working hard. We have to have a site before we can apply for some of the funding. There's some federal CDBG, sorry, and funding. The county has some recording fees that are specifically dedicated for homelessness services and affordable housing services. The city has an affordable housing sales tax that has some ability to spend for some capital improvements and potentially for some operational. So we believe that we can put together, the state has had a large focus on helping communities serve the needs of their community when it comes to housing and the unhoused. And so we believe we can put together a capital stack that can fund and operate this, but we need a site first. All right. And again, we have to be able to afford this. The city and county don't have millions of dollars sitting around. This is a brand new service for us. The dollars that we have available are restricted funds. And so they have a lot of rules around how and when we can use them. And so the site cost, the lease to own and the operating terms, these are very important. The cost of utilities. So again, we have to be thoughtful about taxpayer dollars and the dollars that we spend in order to set up a site and manage it long term. Okay. All right. And then again, the more uncertainty, and you'll see that in some of the site analysis, when we have critical areas, when we have floodplain permitted, it adds more uncertainty. Oftentimes that means an extended timeline, and it means oftentimes an extended cost as well. All right. And so we have a number of resources on the website and on our Be Heard eBird. We actually moved everything over to the website as well. So if you want more information, all of this information will be up there. And we have a number of resources to as well for folks. Okay. All right. So we are looking at a process by which you all have the opportunity to evaluate sites today. And so you have in front of you a site rating sheet, and you're welcome to take notes on that. What we'll ask is that each of these sites, and I guess I would add 2 city council members. We have 3. Delana was actually able to join us at last minute today. And so we'll add a number to that. And so what we'll ask after you've had an opportunity to listen to public comment, after you've heard the individual sites as well, our analysis, and if you have questions or comments or discussion, then we will ask that you actually fill that out and provide a rating to us. Again, this was in the packet for each of those sites, and we will tally those. And it's a number that gives us some discussion points to work with when we have that all together. So that will come up a little bit later. Okay. All right. And so you all have recognized, and thank you to Teo and Lily here. They've done a tremendous amount of work to put together the details to do the site analysis, and Dan as well. And to put together the interactive map so you can see our staff analysis. This is to the best of our ability, given current information. And so we ranked or rated each of the sites that were proposed. Red meant that at a staff level, we eliminated those based on one or more of the criteria that we talked about previously here. And then the yellow would be potentially feasible. That means there are some constraints, there's some uncertainty, there might be some pretty significant development challenges or expenses of a site. And then green were the most feasible, fit the most criteria on again, just from a staff perspective. So now I would offer that Dan, I believe, and I think we're going to switch over in a little bit to the interactive map. So Dan Carlson.
Thank you. So there were a total of 43 sites that were submitted. We're going to start with the ones that staff had determined to be not feasible. And I have just 2 slides here to start with that are kind of a grouping of properties that have something in common that we could, there was a reason based on criteria that we could eliminate those. And then from that point, we're going to move into the interactive map and go through the remainder of the properties that we identified as not feasible, and then move into the yellow properties, the potentially feasible, and then finish up with the potential or properties that we recommended as being feasible. So this first slide, these are properties that were all submitted. We reached out to the landowner and were able to determine that the properties were not for sale or lease. Includes a property on Water Street, Tannin and Lakeshore and Dollar Way. There were 2 properties on Highway 97 near Highway 10. And then 2 properties that were owned by the railroad that are also not available. So we grouped those together as not feasible. Yeah, next slide, Lily, please. So this grouping of properties are properties that are intended for other uses. The first property that you see there, Alder and University, is a rodeo grounds property intended for other use. The First and Pine property designated by the city for surplus for an affordable housing project, and that Canyon Road property is the city's wastewater treatment facility and a designated spray area. The property is also entirely in the floodplain. And then we have this 1402 Dollar Way, which is a stormwater pond, already developed as a stormwater pond. And then the last 4 properties that you have there, Dollar Way and Enterprise, those have covenants that are limiting development on those properties based for levee construction or stormwater collection. So this is the group that really didn't have, it was intended for other uses and couldn't be developed. So we did determine those not to be feasible. So next we're going to move into the interactive map. I think we need to. So I'll give Tail a minute to get set up there. The next set of properties, we did have some properties that were submitted at the Kittitas County Airport.
Oh.
And those are properties that are, we reached out to the county and are not available because the county intends to use those properties for other development. So there was a number of properties, as you can see on the map, but those we put in that not feasible category based on the county's intent to use those properties. The next one will go to 303 North Venus, the number 5. Yeah, this is a property that is in heavy industrial zoning, so it's not a permitted use in that zone. And the parcel is entirely occupied by a warehouse building, so there is an area to construct. So that was why that one was determined to be not feasible by staff. The next one is the 1000 Ringer Loop. So this property was not accessible to transit, not within the urban growth area. And it also has deed restrictions on development of that property. So that was one that we also determined to be not feasible. But we're gonna, we've got a handful of them that are still in that red category to go through. If there's any that you want to discuss or have questions about, we can discuss those. But, so the next one is 303 West Tacoma. So this property, is, about 0.18 acres in size. We looked at the possibility of right-of-way vacation and combination. That only brought the property to about 0.4 acres. Determined that property to be, too small for the proposed use. The property is also entirely within the floodplain. The, well, right away vacation, might need some help with that one. It's gonna be, insufficient area when that's done. So, the next property was 1006 South Ruby. And this site is the location of the Happy Feet Daycare. It's a structure that has an existing building on it. The remaining land is not sufficient for development and also in the floodplain. The next one that we have is 1001 Industrial Way. And this is the county's transfer station. Currently in use as a transfer station. It is heavy industrial zoning, and it's not available currently because it is being used for the transfer station. Next one is 1007 Industrial Way. And this one is the animal shelter location. It's heavy industrial zoning and is currently in use and doesn't have the developable area. So I recommended that one is not feasible. Then the next submittal was the city shop property, 607 to 701 South Industrial Way. That is currently in use as the city shop, and the property is zoned heavy industrial. And then I have about three more that are on the not feasible list. Dollar Way and North Pot Road. And this property is almost entirely covered by a pond and is not developable. So there are two more that were, these are ones that were primarily because of industrial zoning. The first one was on Enterprise Way. I think it's the north property. Yep. So this property is zone light industrial. So the emergency shelter is not a permitted use in that zone. And the property is entirely in the floodplain. And then one more property, 1831 Highway 97. And this property is zoned industrial. It's outside of the city limits, not accessible by transit. And we were not able to contact the owner to check the availability on this one. So that's another one that ended up in not feasible. So from there, we'll move on to the potentially feasible. These are the ones in yellow on the map. So 701 South Main. This property is on Central Commercial 2, and so emergency shelter is a permitted use in that zone. The site is about 0.8 of a mile from downtown and 0.7 of a mile from KBH Hospital. And the nearest transit stop is at Route 13 and 14 at Ruby and Mountain View. The site is available for lease starting in late July 2024 with an estimated cost of $6,500 per month plus taxes and site expenses. This would require extension of a sewer line, estimated cost of about $150,000. Water and electrical utilities are available on the site. Total estimated improvement cost of $326,000 inclusive of fencing and lighting improvements. The nearby surrounding uses are commercial, including Ranch and Home, Kittitas Medical Supply, and Rite Aid. Parcel size is 1.3 acres. And almost all of the site is within that 100-year floodplain. Our next site is the Helena and Sycamore. And this is a property owned by Central Washington University. The zoning for this property is public reserve, and the emergency shelter is a permitted use in this zone. It's approximately 2.1 miles from downtown and 2.3 miles from KVH. And the nearest transit stop is Route 12 at Helena and Alder. We were not able to determine the sale or lease terms and cost for this property. It would be a portion of it's a 52-acre property. It would 5 acres could be possible with subdivision of the property. A subdivision would the property would require that that subdivision and frontage improvements would be required to connect Helena across the property. Sewer and water is available across Helena Avenue. And then there are power options, including underground Helena crossing or overhead line on the south side of the street. Nearby uses include, they're mostly residential. They include the Central Park Apartments, Crestview Terrace Apartments, Timothy Park Rentals. And there's some vacant Central Washington University property and student apartments in the area. And that property does not appear to have any critical areas. The next one is at Berry Road and Canyon Road. This is a property that is in the urban growth area, so it's under the county's jurisdiction. The county has it zoned urban residential, so it which doesn't currently allow the emergency shelter. It would require annexation into the city and zoning in accordance with the city's future land use designation. It's about 2 miles from downtown and from KVH Hospital. There's currently no transit available nearby. The nearest transit is line 12 at Tanum and Ruby, about 1 mile away. This property would require frontage improvements along the length of the parcel on Canyon and Berry Roads. Sewer and water is available at Berry Road, and utility extensions would be needed along Canyon Road. And nearby uses include hotel, restaurant, truck stop, the city's wastewater treatment facility, and agricultural uses. And this property is a total of 16.9 acres. A portion of the property is in the floodplain, but it does appear the area closest to Canyon and Berry Roads are free of critical areas. Oh, there's a creek on the south and east sides of the property, but that area closest to those roads appears free of flood and wetlands.
Hey, Dan, the estimated purchase price on that 2 million that's in there in the packet, is that for the entire property or is that for a parcel for the proposed shelter?
My understanding that was for the entire property.
Entire property, yeah.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
The next one is Highway 97, parcel 16644. So the zoning for this property is highway commercial, which is a permitted use. It's approximately 2.9 miles from downtown, 3.7 miles from KVH. The nearest transit stop is routes 15 and 16 at Love's Travel Stop, about a half mile away from the property. We were not able to determine the sale or lease terms. It was unknown, did not get a response from the property owner. The property does have water and sewer available crossing Highway 97. Currently no power available, but power extension is planned in conjunction with the county's construction of a new transfer station. The nearby uses are commercial, including University Auto, truck equipment, and industrial Ellensburg cement products. The parcel size is 7 acres, but there was a portion of the parcel was previously advertised for lease. But again, we weren't able to get to make contact with the property owner there. And there don't appear to be any critical areas on this site. And then Green Avenue, which is right there. The zoning for this property is regional center mixed use, and shelter is a permitted use there. Property is about 3 miles to downtown and 4 miles to KVH. Nearest transit stop is at the Love's Travel Stop, about a mile away from this location. This property is currently for sale, listed at $2 million. And there is a pending offer on this property with a feasibility period that would expire in May. Utilities and site development. Water and sewer are available from Green Avenue with a latecomers charge. Frontage improvements would be required along Green Avenue, and power to the area is planned in conjunction with the county's transfer station. Parcel size is 15 acres. It is about 2/3 of the parcel is in the floodplain. And that was it for the sites that we identified as being potentially feasible. 2 more sites that we identified as feasible. First one is the Foursquare Church property, Mountain View and Rosewood. This property is zoned residential suburban. So indoor shelter is a conditional use permit in that zoning district. So this is a property that would require that hearing with the hearing examiner in order to get authority to have that use on that site. It is approximately 1.2 miles from downtown and 0.4 miles from KVH. Nearest transit stop is Route 13 at Mountain View and Chestnut. That initial contact with the church is open to leasing a portion of the site. But if the property is recommended, the church board would need to evaluate and approve that lease of that site. The site would require hydrant installation, an estimated cost of $65,000. The initial the consultant review indicated an estimate total improvement cost of about $394,000, inclusive of fencing, lighting, improvements that would be required for the site. Nearby uses include the Foursquare Church, the Pacifica Senior Living, and Meadows Place Senior Living facilities, and private residential uses. The combined church properties are 6.3 acres. But a portion of the site could be used for a sleep center with room for expansion, and there don't appear to be any critical areas on this site. And then the last one that we have is the 1200 South Ruby property. This property is zoned neighborhood center mixed use, and shelter is a permitted use in this zoning district. The site is about 9/10 from downtown, 8/10 of a mile from KVH, and the nearest transit stop is at Ruby and Umptanum. Use of the proposed 4.86 acre site for 10 years would be in exchange for utility improvements. Total improvement cost estimation is 394,000. Utilities would need to be extended across the parcel to the potential sleep center site. Nearby uses are commercial, including Les Schwab Tire Center, and truck service, Happy Feet Academy, the Golden Dragon Restaurant. The parcel is 4.86 acres, and a portion of the property could be used for the sleep center with room for expansion. And for critical areas, the property does include Wilson Creek along the eastern edge. And there is a small portion of floodplain on the northeast part of the parcel. The buffer from the stream would need to be determined and incorporated in the site plan based on further site work. So that's the last one that we have with a recommendation on feasible.
So at this time, does anyone on the committee have a burning question about any of the sites or the criteria for evaluation?
Not any burning questions, but first, thank you to city staff for assembling this. This is no easy task to assemble within a week, essentially, to be able to provide zoning availability, fees and costs and all those things. So much appreciated to that. Dan, I was just going to say, I know there's probably some questions in mind because when you hear floodplain versus say stormwater versus say a wetland, just so that folks are aware, and I'm going to answer this just to make it brief, is that when it comes to a wetland, you're talking about a substantial mitigation improvement versus some things that you might have to do with say a floodplain, or another substantial one would be stormwater if it's a retention pond and those kind of things. Because I'm sure that when you see floodplain on a lot of these properties and you're wondering why one was recommended and one was not, that's part of the city consideration. And I'm just going to add that in unless you want to add something to that, Don.
I would just add floodplain is something where what you're going to see is the need for elevation and flood proofing still can be developed. With wetlands, your wetland's going to need to be typed, and then there's going to be a buffer associated with that type, and all the development will have to stay outside of that.
Right.
And then stormwater is a use that's already designated for a purpose for collecting stormwater for impervious surface. So that's not one that you can mitigate or further develop.
Yeah.
Okay. We have lots of interest in this and I want to respect everyone's time. So how many people would like to make a comment? Okay, that's not everyone. So that's, okay. If you would, come to the microphone and state your name, and if you would keep your comments to what, it'd be most helpful if you argued for or against a specific site. Because again, that's the jurisdiction of this committee. We are tasked with recommending a site. If you want to argue about sleep centers or anything like that, you have to come to the city council because that's who's going to make that decision. Yeah, I think 2 minutes since there wasn't 30 people, 2 minutes. If you could stay succinct, I'd appreciate it. So the lady in black in front, you had your hand raised? Yeah. If you could.
My name is Erin Sinclair, City of Ellensburg. And I would like to advocate, I did go out earlier this week and drove and looked at all of the feasible and potentially feasible sites. And I'll just narrow it down to the feasible sites because I suspect that's what we're really going to be looking at. 1200 South Ruby and then the space around Foursquare Church. And I would like to advocate for the space around Foursquare Church. There was quite a bit of controversy over the South Ruby location just because of the daycare is there and there are businesses that feel that it may impact their business. Whereas Foursquare Church is open to supporting the site. It is, if you look at it, it does have a fence all the way around it already, which will help contain the activity, I guess, of a sleep center. And I think it is still close enough to some of the resources that you're looking for, that I think that it would work well. So I'm advocating for Foursquare Church. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Steve?
So I want to clarify a couple things. I represent the Foursquare Church. However, I do not represent the church decision. I don't get to make the decision, right? So I put the property forward. There's a whole host of people that will be engaged in this process. And some of my folks will be like, what? So I just want to make that clear. I also want to make clear, just this may be basic observation, but the development cost of our property is going to be similar to the development cost of the Hope Source property. However, we will charge rent. I mean, there will be, I don't know, we'll look at something fair, but that you need to make sure that, I can't neither go to my denomination who has to approve it, nor to my people and say, yeah, we're just doing this. So, because we don't have any other, it's not like we're going, wow, we're going to get infrastructure. I mean, that will benefit us, but that's not in the plan. So if I was writing the checks, I would go with the Hope Source property simply because it is the most cost effective.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the back? You.
My name's Elizabeth McKeon and I live in the Rosewood, 55 and over park just south of the Foursquare Church. You mentioned that the property we're talking about is surrounded by elderly people completely. Rosewood Park is made up of a lot of retirees who have worked all their lives. They own their own units and have a sizable investment in them. The big concern we have is resale. And we're ready to move on to the next phase of care. Are we going to be able to sell our homes? I do not support forced restoration. Thank you.
Thank you. And who, Cheryl? I do not have that list.
So Nancy, we can read the names.
Okay, read off the list.
In the meantime, would you like to speak?
My name is Cheryl Chance. I live in the county, but I do a heck of a lot of business in the city of Ellensburg. I have heard several times from that side of the counter, if you to do nothing is not an option. So what I'd like y'all to think about today is at least do nothing for the next 7 to 8 weeks, because Boise versus Martin is not even the name that the homelessness that the 9th District Court of Appeals turned down. Anyway, it's at the Supreme Court. It is now called Johnson versus Grant Pass. They started oral arguments this week, and I talked to the lawyer down in Salem that is presenting this case to the Supreme Court. He told me, his name is Aaron, his last name starts with an H, that he expects the I want my time back. He expects a decision by the end of June. So to do nothing for the next 7 or 8 weeks, I ask you to please think about that, because I'm advocating for not necessarily the folks that have issues, but the folks that will have issues if we lose Les Schwab. If we lose Les Schwab, there's a lot of people that are going to be hurting in this city and this county. In the past 4 years, they've paid over $15,000 in taxes from 2019 to 2022. In 1923, they had their taxes jump on their 1.46 acres, $16,000, almost 16.8. So think about that. And when you're thinking about this sleep shelter, be advised that the World Soccer Final Tournaments is being held in Seattle next year. And Seattle has been told to clean up their streets. Now, I ask you, what do you think is going to happen 106 miles from here? What's going to be coming our way? I would rather have less Schwab. And I get about being homeless because I was getting a divorce. I had a 3-year-old child, and I know what that feels like, but I also know what it takes to take personal responsibility for oneself.
Thank you. Sir.
My name is Logan Denlinger. I technically live in the county, but I'm here. Sorry, I do not talk in public very much, and so I apologize if I stumble over my words. I'm here representing Happy Feet Academy. I also would just like for a moment of levity to acknowledge the fact that somebody put forward Happy Feet Daycare's property as a site for this. That's hilarious to me when I saw it on the list, and when the city called to acknowledge that, I howled with laughter. That was great. It was a good chuckle. I just want to acknowledge the fact that homelessness is not going away. Right? We know it's an issue in our community, and so the stance of Happy Feet is not advocating against homelessness, against a shelter being in our community. We would ask that this committee and then the city council consider the impact of siting a sleep center, such as we're all discussing, next to another vulnerable population, such as the daycare that I own and operate with my family. That's it in a nutshell. We're not saying that sleep centers shouldn't be sited at all. We're asking that you choose a location further away from vulnerable populations, wherever that might be. I think there's a lot of good options with pros and cons and hurdles to overcome. I'd love to be part of the solution if any of those properties are chosen, but I would specifically ask that the one on Ruby Street be not the site for this center. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ma'am.
My name is Louise Demetrescu, and I live in Rosewood. And I would like to say that I'm, I guess, advocating against the Foursquare Church being chosen as the spot for the sleep center. I do think that the Rosewood community and the other two places whose names I can't think of right now are also vulnerable communities, and that they're generally for the elderly and for people who are in vulnerable positions in our community related to a lot of the other residential neighborhoods. I am sympathetic to the plight of the homeless, absolutely. But I also feel that placing these sleep centers in residential neighborhoods is problematic. I'm going to guess, and I know this will be not a popular thing to say, but I'm going to guess that there is no chance that any sleep center would ever be located in the neighborhood of a city council member or anybody on this ad hoc committee either. And I just think that it's unfortunate that some of us in the community are facing this without any explanation or any I'm not really sure exactly what I want to say here. Without any promotion of the information about site possibilities. It just seems that this is being sort of thrust upon us with no explanation, and that bothers me. If you go ahead and cite this at Foursquare, which it seems to me is kind of a foregone conclusion, because based on your reports, it seems it's green all the way across, except for the conditional use permit. I think that will be very unfortunate. So thanks.
Thank you. In the corner Okay. This is not as many, this is more hands than I saw initially, so, yeah, we'll take a few more.
I'll be really fast, I promise.
Thanks.
Dr. Melissa Dominga, I'm one of the owners of Happy Feet as well. That's my hubby. I just wanted to say that I've come before the council and kind of shared my concerns elevated the voices of some of my family members that have brought concerns to me with the location being next to Happy Feet. I wanted to thank the council for being willing to consider other locations. I know some of you don't know about the history that we've been collaborating very strongly with the city and with the county over the last couple of years to expand childcare. And so we've received some city funds for some forgiving of some traffic impact fees. We received $500 million from the county commissioners. So everybody has stepped up and put their money where their mouth is to call the childcare crisis what it is and do what we can to expand it. My concern is that if all my families choose to move to our new location that's opening this summer, and I have a hard time filling that location, we're not expanding childcare in the way that everyone has promised. And the way I have promised you guys and the way I have promised the commissioners to work so diligently to expand childcare. And I want to be a good steward of the money that has been given to me from the state Department of Commerce and from the commissioners and from the city council and all of those things. So I'm advocating for us to explore an alternative option, not the Ruby Street location, for that reason, so that I can continue to expand childcare and make sure that I'm offering as many childcare slots as I can to our community because we are in a childcare desert. So that's my advocacy.
Thank you. Mr. Kelleher.
Thank you, Pat Kelleher. I live in the county. I'm number 10 on your list, number 1 in your hearts. I want it. Okay, the no action alternative is not an option in my opinion. When I saw it at city council, I went out and optioned a piece of property. That's the Tacoma property next to the Goodwill. To the west of the car wash down there. You can review my 77-page application. We'll turn it in. I have 2 other people working on it. One is David Bernard, who from RPM, who does this kind of thing for like Los Angeles, Skid Row, Portland, Bremerton. He's very qualified. And David Finley does the shelter portion of the building. It's a soup and nuts proposal. I will leave my submitted comments to the committee to consider. These guys are pros that can reach out to the neighborhood around it and get by them. And move forward on this and get it done. It's $3,000 a month. We're ready to rock and roll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I saw one more in the red.
Debbie Butler, I did sign up and debated. I have worked with the cold weather shelter since 2015. I'm glad the map was up. I did look at it ahead of time and I wasn't able to get to everywhere. But right now I do like the 4-square position. I know that everyone is going to be NIMBY, not in my backyard. But for right now, my vote is for that one. But I have a feeling most people want it out in highway number 97 where it's out of sight, out of mind.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson, and then I'm going to ask our committee to score their sheets and we need to get on with that discussion. So your last comment, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Landis. I also live in Ellensburg. I would recommend that we place people to sleep where other people sleeps. And that means in residential areas. I don't sleep in a commercial zone. I sleep in a residential zone. I think homeless people deserve that same sort of right, that same level of dignity. And yeah, so I think that the 4-square choice is awesome. It's also really close to essential services such as the hospital, such as shopping centers, for people to live regular, dignified lives. I know I myself am like 2 paychecks away from being homeless. I'm sure that other people in the community are as well. And cost of housing in this community is ridiculous. So understanding that these people have been placed into this situation, not out of anything else, but the way we've designed our housing, this for-profit housing complex is ridiculous. And these people are victims of that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So committee, my first question is, does anyone want to move anything from the not feasible list to the analyze, score it list?
Yeah, I think that Mr. Kelleher's recommendation as far as West Tacoma needs to be part of the potentially feasible.
I have one as well.
Okay, so that was number 10, and Dave, what's the number?
17, which is 701 South Main, or as I think of it, next to Ranch and Home.
Oh, it's already on the potentially feasible.
I thought we were going from yellow to green. Sorry.
We're
No, we're going
My
from
apologies.
the red to yellow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, oops, okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, so we're gonna take 5 minutes and finish scoring our sheets. Turn them,
Look, can I add one item
okay.
about the Tacoma site?
Okay.
One additional item that might be helpful is the city does own right-of-way adjacent to that. And I know part of the consideration of expansion is that the city could vacate that right-of-way and use it for building and construction to expand that. We talk with our public works folks, that is actually access to stormwater and to facilities. So we cannot vacate that site. So that's not buildable, that's site. So
By the way,
this was the one that was 0.4 acres.
Just moved, yes, correct. It's 0.18 acres. I believe.
0.18 acres. Yeah, okay. Do you still want to move that?
hold on, there was a comment.
Susan?
So I want to go on record. Hope Source will be recusing themselves from the scoring and vote.
Okay. Jerry?
One of the things that, as I listen to the people out here and I listen to the concerns, one of the things is property values and one of the things is where do the sleepers go during the day? So I would like Don to answer that question since he's worked with the shelter.
Jerry, if you could move the microphone to, yeah, I'm sorry. We're getting signals from.
Sorry about that. I thought they'd hear me over at Safeway. What I hear is the concern is that property values drop. And also, where do the sleepers go during the day? And I would like Don to address that since he's been with the Ministerial Association for 8 years. And he's dealt with every morning at 7 or 7:30, out the door you go.
There's a number of places that when they leave the shelter in the winter time, we're talking about because this is cold weather shelter that I'm aware of. They go to other public places. They go to Safeway. They go to Fred Meyer. They go to the library. They go to the library on campus. That's mostly where they are during the day to stay warm. They'll have probably a different location where they may go during the summertime. If there is a sleep center in place when it's hot, they would go to places where they can get shade and be cooler. So that's pretty much my understanding of where they go.
Okay.
And of course, they have appointments for social services, so they're in social services buildings in various places too.
Thank you. Okay, so Do you need 5 minutes or are we ready to just turn our scoring sheets in and they're going to need a few minutes to.
Just FYI, I will recuse myself on a scoring for the property that's on CW since I am capital planning. So, yeah.
So the,
Can I just ask one clarification question? I'm looking at the spreadsheet here and I'm seeing the Tacoma property. I'm going over to where it says acreage. Does it say 0.2? Is that what everybody sees?
It's 0.18.
0.18
Yes.
of an acre,
Rounded to 0.2.
which is about 1/5 of the size that we need.
Yes. So I ask staff to collect our sheets
Yes.
and
I need to transfer mine.
Nancy, can we take a 5-minute break? And
yeah,
we'll-
so
staff will
so
collect.
5 minutes to allow the staff to add up our scores.
Please put your names on your sheets.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to talk about the one downtown. Nancy, is there any chance?
We're gonna get the sheets to discuss right after. So once we put the scores together, you still get.
Well, I mean, but I want to say some things about the one on Main Street before people assign their scores.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Okay. Okay, committee,
Attention committee members.
committee members, if you could just, Dave wants to discuss the Main Street before we score it. I mean,
Right.
I'm thinking we can
Ask some comments.
alter, but go ahead.
I promise I'll be quick, but one of the things that we haven't really talked about is site number 17, and no one has made comment on this. It's 701 South Main, or as I think of it, if you were standing and looking at Arnold's Ranch and Home, it's the vacant lot to the left. As I've been thinking about these since we got all of the data back in the last few days and I've been driving around, this site is kind of stuck in my mind a little bit, and I think it has a few things to recommend it and some bad parts too. First of all, it's in our downtown area. There's no disruption to nearby residences, no daycare center nearby. It's already on the walking path that most of our homeless people are on. They're already walking on Main Street. There won't be any extra homeless people in a residential neighborhood or commercial zone. It's the closest to Hope Source, where people are going for services. It's the closest to the Open Table, where people are going for meals. It's closest to the Medical Arts Building, where people go for routine medical care. And it's the second closest to the hospital, where they'd be going for emergency care. It's close to downtown. It's close to stores. It's close to Fred Meyer, which is unfortunately a panhandling location, but we have to be realistic. That's where they'll be headed. There are some cons to this, and that's the expense. The estimated $6,500 a month rent. Utilities seem to be about the same as the other sites. I am a little bit worried, and maybe our law enforcement people can talk about this. The east side of the west side of the parcel abuts onto the railroad. And right back there in those trees by the railroad has been a traditional homeless campsite. So is that a problem? I looked on the county assessor's website, and that lot is deep. It goes all the way back to the railroad. So if there's concern about siting those shelters close to Main Street, it doesn't have to be. They could be put further back towards the west. Having said all of that, this is my surprising second pick. I still think that the Hope Source location is the best, but if there is such strong community pushback, particularly in the childcare issue, 701 South Main is to me, a very surprising contender. Sorry for the extra stuff, but no one else had talked about it.
No, good point. Yeah, let's collect the sheets and
Bio break.
and take a bathroom break.
5-minute bio break.
Break.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, no, you're good.
Do I write my name on it?
As you can tell, yeah, we're the process we're figuring out as we go. So thanks.
I'm sorry, I've already made up.
It's in progress.
You want me to?
It's good progress, so good progress.
There you go.
Sweet, thank you.
You want? Yep.
Bio break.
Oh.
Were you surprised at the public comments? Like how many or?
No, it's a real hot issue, especially with the childcare.
Yeah.
And nobody wants homeless people nearby them, so.
It happens. I know that well, actually. Yeah. They're just people.
Yep. The thing is, so many people live paycheck to paycheck. And if you live paycheck to paycheck, you're one accident or emergency away from being homeless yourself.
I would bet, I made that comment, my sister in past conversations, a room full of this, there are probably 2 or 3 people who have relatives who are homeless who have been. Statistically. I mean, it could be, it's not unusual. Because if I bring it up, I don't bring it up, surprise myself to bring it up with this group, but I thought that was important for me anyway, but people just, it's unrecognized relationship lots of times.
Lights are on, we're still not. So it says moving.
I was about to confess to a murder, so thanks for the warning. Oh, good heavens. We're on the record now.
Public comment is public. Nice of them to come up. I might have said something.
Oh.
In Roslyn, we just have that owl. We used to have these.
Not or the additional one that we
And our
have.
planning,
No,
so our general manager
But
bought
it's-
that owl.
Every day.
Did it actually work? But, sometimes it keeps rotating around. We have the clean up and people never know if there's gonna be a clean or not, because the owl.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so
It might be. I share rumors about.
Yeah.
It can pick up. Really neat.
do what you want. Let's do it.
Here's some of that.
We'll be able to,
You can hear
honor our,
that guy, that makes the guy who can see that. We thought for a long time, on the left back corner of the room. That's where the trouble meetings. That's the only time I taught teachers. I taught teachers how to teach writing. It's the same behavior, people go back. I'm really curious. Watch the people sit down. Not a question I ask here. I'm just wondering. It was just like if they're seeing it, it's in the number. I expected, I don't know if they had, they don't compare it to, but.
children are allowed.
That's a word. It's a good lot. Seriously. I don't understand.
Really? No, I know, we made it like children here. Has minor background issues, like to some, it's been in the past. Well, it has.
Not at all.
Pacifica and on the other side, it used to be Meadows.
Roslyn is 60% forward. So there's.
close to getting the scores. So I just want to make some comments on, oh, that wasn't microphoned. Okay, so just bear in mind that, you know, we are ranking this on the set of criteria that we had developed that, you know, as I went through it, I might weight this more than that on certain properties or anyway, when it comes to council, they may weight things differently. They may take something off because, or as we move through things, something might drop off. The Foursquare Church may not be as available as we might think, or whatever. So what I think we need to give the council is a ranked list and then start working from there. It is on the screen and okay. So the total is what we're interested in. So looks like the South Ruby Street ranked highest, followed by the Foursquare. Pathways is the South Ruby.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize.
So I think we'll just give this information to the council, and we can have a discussion. Does anyone want to, like Dave did, give us pros and cons arguments for anything?
These are just my quick comments. So for any of the properties that were within city limits or right next to the edge of city limits, I think one of the things to consider is the transit. So as has been mentioned by staff, there is opportunity to change transit paths if necessary for some of those properties. That's just a comment for those things. The other portion of this is the cost of developing these properties. So whether it's the purchase price or the actual development of properties, that's going to be something that's going to take into consideration. The other portion of this that is a little bit hard to see, especially with some of the larger properties, the ones that were $2 million, the ones that are 16 acres, 17 acres, those kinds of things. Obviously, from a purchase price, we would not be purchasing the whole property. We would be looking at possibly parcels off for the size that is appropriate for a sleep shelter. So, but there are concerns there, obviously, with the distance, the location, and the access to services as they are well far away from the services that are intended for the unhomed.
So I just want to say I wasn't part of our criteria explicitly, but I kind of weighted owning better than leasing properties. And to Delano's point of $2 million for 16 acres, that, you know, potentially we could split off an acre and a half and then sell the remainder, or, you know, if it was sold as one. So there's, I think, spending the lease price of, what was it, $6,500 a month for 20 years gives you $2 million. You can, and we want, and then it's secure, and we don't have to, have a landlord say, we don't want you anymore. So, I kind of tilted my numbers a little towards owning. But I think those are nuances that the council can deal with. If there's any other comments, Susan, did you have?
Would it be helpful? Hope Source did not vote in this. And I sent my paper in with that written on it, just for a matter of record that we did not. Would it be helpful to the committee to hear how Hope Source is looking at developing that property and why we might enter a lease for a sleep center?
Absolutely. I think that, I think everyone would be interested in it.
So Hope Source purchased that property with money from the county and the city to increase affordable housing in the county. It's on, right?
Yeah.
And part of it was the motel that was the Knights Inn. And that one we are renovating so that it will be affordable housing for families, et cetera. And we intended always to develop the 4 acres behind it into affordable housing that we could use. It has some units where if you're homeless, you would go into that unit for transitional housing and then to regular affordable. So it's a stepped process that we're building there so that as we work with people, stabilize them, we can move them along, a pathway that eventually they can, with support services for a year or so, be able to go on to market rate and to go out. So it's a whole plan. So on that property, we intended to put renovate the Knights Inn and put 60 units, more or less, of affordable housing on that. We have a developer who's working with us who may in fact foot the cost of the infrastructure. That's to be seen. We don't know that for sure, but they're talking about it. And the reason that we talked with the city finally about using the acreage there for the sleep center, and we didn't do it right away, but that's the business we're in. That's who we help. And so we thought 2 things. Number one, we know they work. We're working with one in Moses Lake, so we know how to do that. And number 2, it's an opportunity to move through a pathway from there on their way out. And we felt like that was, we could forego a lease for 10 years without cost because it was the right thing for us to be involved in. We were going to build anyway. And so we just felt like that was the right decision for us, for the community we serve.
So Susan, the question I have had is, after 10 years, would we be looking for a new sleep center site, or we would be negotiating a lease for?
Well, based on the fact that I just said that's our wheelhouse, and that is something we will always want because we have a chance to talk with people, work with them, build their trust, and move them to a better life. So chances of us ever not letting the city have that site is probably nil.
So you don't have future plans?
Not on that
more,
piece.
okay.
Not on that piece.
And
We
this is
have-
the piece, we're talking about the piece that's furthest back from the Knights Inn, right?
on the eastern third or fifth, I think it is, about back there. So no, I would say, I mean, we can drop an agreement before you make your decision, but it wouldn't be in our best interest to, in 10 years, say, you got to move.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fluid decision that it involves negotiation, no matter which parcel we recommend and which parcel the city wants to pursue. Yeah, I can.
We're just willing, and our board has approved.
Okay,
us doing that.
Thank you. Is there any other committee member who would like to speak to the list, the ranking, pros and cons of any of the sites?
Sorry, I will just say that the land cost or the sale and lease cost has been the hardest thing that I was able to score because we have so little information. To me, there are really only 4 viable sites here: Foursquare Church, Pathways, South Main, or Canyon Road. And for Foursquare Church, we had nothing until Steve Luton 45 minutes ago said, we'll do something fair. So how do you score that? Pathways, according to the information we were given, Hope Source says if the city provides $394,000 worth of utility improvement, they'll lease, they will forego that, they'll do that as a swap in the form of a lease. And if we prorate that out over 10 years, that's about $3,283 a month. So that's the cost of that utility swap lease. 701 South Main staff estimates $6,500 a month, and Canyon Road is available to purchase 16 acres for $2 million. So if this is a case of apples and oranges and zebras and computers and refrigerators, I mean, how do we compare that stuff? So good luck, City Council.
Well, like I said, it's going to probably be fluid and we may have our preferences and then shift depending on how things work out.
So just to be clear, the developer, we believe, will take that infrastructure cost on. It's not a promise, but it's a good possibility. So at worst case, it would be putting the infrastructure in. Best case is somebody else does it.
Great.
I was just going to add, they all have infrastructure costs. So they're all, and they're relatively close to being the same.
They are.
In terms of infrastructure costs. So
yeah,
that sort of didn't enter into it because they kind of all equal. So to a degree.
Yeah.
Except that if the developer will pay for it.
Well, I think some of the frontage improvements, I pegged as a pretty high extra cost, versus some water and sewer, but, yeah. So, I mean, we are late getting you out of here. I apologize. But if there is nothing further, I think we're sending this list to the council. And as I read it, our first recommendation is Pathways, followed by Foursquare, followed by South Main, followed by Berry Road. And then if we have to get into and go further, to explore things, we will. So is that reasonable for everyone?
Well, I just have a quick comment. I didn't vote. I had struggled with it just because I felt like I personally, and I think this is probably true for everybody to some degree, would say weight neighborhood impact way differently than I would weight the cost, or I would weight access to services. So I felt like I would just be skewing the numbers if I just went with the numbers on the sheet. I wouldn't have a true representation of what I felt to be the best and worst sites. And so I think we need to just consider that that these numbers may mean different things than what the intent is of people's wishes.
So this is an opportunity to tell us you don't think our number one, just because of our numbers turned out that way, if you would weight the neighborhood impacts greater and take it off the list just based on that, then that's something we should forward to council as well.
Yeah, and I'm not, I wish I had a suggestion for a better way to do it. But for me, like if we're talking a plan that's going to be in effect for decades, that, none of these places are going to be cheap, but I wouldn't say that a minimal difference in cost would outweigh where we put this thing. For me, where we put this is one of the highest priorities, considering it is somewhat affordable, right?
Yep.
So I think we just need to take that into consideration. And if I had filled this out based on these numbers, it would not have represented what I thought to be the best or worst locations. And I don't know if that's true for anybody else, but that would have been true for me.
I had those same thoughts, but so can you tell us how you would rank them? Just give us a 1, 2, 3, 4.
Off the cuff?
Yeah.
Well, in no particular order, I'll give you my top 3.
Okay.
I'll do that. I would say, I think the Pathways property is very compelling as it is. the Berry Road and Canyon Road. And I know the parcel on Highway 97 has been for sale for years. It's not currently listed, but I'm sure that property could be had for much less than it has been historically advertised for.
Okay. Does anyone else, is there something that you would modify in your scoring, the number? I mean, is there something that sticks out that wasn't captured in the numbers?
I think Andy was exactly right that this could have been weighted in a different way. And obviously the neighborhood impact and concerns is the one that we're all here because of. I think the council knows that and knows that that's where this conversation is really going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't want them to get these numbers and just be like,
No.
this is what everybody wants.
The council just doesn't do that.
It needs to hear and be aware. This is,
Yes.
that Nancy and the other council are not going to take this as a stand.
I think maybe I think it's important for me to get that validation. I assume it's important for the public to know that this isn't our in stone recommendation based on just a 1, 2, 3 on a.
Right.
It's a criteria factor that's put together. That was the best analysis from the staff. There are some viable things that are a part of the consideration. And absolutely, there are a lot of things that we as council will definitely be considering as part of this decision. This is not lighthearted by any means.
Nancy, I just would want to say one more thing. When I first looked at the agenda, I am not used to just short public comments that then aren't answered very clearly. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we all get a chance to say something, but we don't know, they're asking questions and we don't get to respond to their comments. I like give and take.
Yeah.
And we're not having much give and take in the process where somebody asks a question and we can then answer their question. I've other than being in the ministry, I've done real estate sales and some investment sales and those kinds of things. And when somebody presents an objection, sometimes it's just, I don't understand clearly what's at stake here. And a response to that can sometimes take an objection away. And I'm not sure we're answering people's objections. We're just hearing them. They get a chance to voice, but I don't know if they get an answer. So
we struggle with that a lot.
Right.
Just,
so that's the forum that I wish we had an opportunity to have some question and response. However you want to fit that in. I do that.
Yeah. I think that is always going to be a point of contention. It's always going to be a little bit frustrating for the public on that sector. The amount of time it would take to be able to answer every single question is a thing that everybody needs to consider. If everybody here had the opportunity to ask questions and get those responses, or have the staff find out and get those responses, this is a multiple year session. This is not a day session. So that's the reality of it. So I can understand from the public's perspective, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, those kinds of things are very frustrating. Just taking time, that this is a process of trying to explain what the situation is to catch everyone up in case they haven't been part of the process very quickly to try to get you to all an understanding on what decisions need to be made. The system is not perfect. It never will be. There's always opportunities for improvement. So I'd ask for grace and patience with that everybody in this room try to communicate as best as possible on all the things that should be considered, like the fact that if you're concerned about the scoring matrix associated with this, that there are some intangibles that need to be considered. And those are the types of things that we need to hear. And I do appreciate everyone's comments that came in here. These are important things, not only for this committee, but for the city council to hear. And they'll be important when you go to the next city council meeting. I implore you, do not just sit on your morals from this meeting. Take it to city council. That is why this is your city just as much as it is all of our city. Thank you.
right. So so on that note, we are, this will come to the council on May 6th. And so everyone will have an opportunity to address the council, who will actually be making the decision and giving the direction on what property to pursue first. So, or maybe even simultaneously, but so.
Absolutely. Yes. So the item is scheduled to go to the May 6th meeting. And again, there may not be a decision. They may be more process. Sometimes we have tools in our toolbox. With this committee talked about doing some sort of open house at some point too. So where the process will unfold, we'll be very clear about what that is. And we'll also want the county commissioners to weigh in on this. This is a joint project. And so we will announce sort of those next steps, but the item for at least an update will come to the council at the May 6th meeting.
So Jerry, did you have something?
You said 5 o'clock. I got an appointment.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yes,
I
we,
apologize to you, but when you say 5, I said 5.
we changed it to 5:30, but, but we are past that. So I appreciate everyone being here and, this is a process. So, yeah, thanks for your time. We are adjourned. You need to hear that. Those words.
Just say it. Make it official.